It's Create Day, my friends. Thanks so much for stopping by. I hope you enjoy these spring-inspired thrift flips. So let's get started. I've got this metal pitcher that I had already spray painted black, and then I have a rolling pin and a cutting board. I'm starting with the metal pitcher, and I'm going to give this 2 good coats of the white chalk paint. Now for the 3rd coat, I'm just stippling on my paint to help smooth out the brush lines. And also this picture has that kind of hammered finish to it. So I felt like this would just kind of help kind of smooth that out and make it not so obvious. Now I have this paper napkin. Well, I thought it was like a big dinner napkin, but it's actually a guest hand towel. And anyway, I like the butterflies on it, so I'm laying it out to see how I want to cut these out. I'm using my water pen to trace around so that I can tear these out rather than using scissors. I like the, ripped edge over the straight scissor edge. But this is just on the single ply. I removed the other 2 plies before I started this process. And so with my scissors, I'm just giving myself a little working room here so I can start tearing around the edges of the butterflies. I just keep tearing and re-wetting until I have everybody separated the way that I want them. So now I can lay them on to my picture and get them arranged in how I want to glue them down, and then just start applying them with Mod Podge. I also have this other one that I cut out separately that I'm going to add to the ones that are all kind of hooked together. And I repeat the same process on the other side as well. So with my Mod Podge, I just start at one end, gluing down. I glue down that top little wing first and then work my way across the entire batch of butterflies. Now for this last little single butterfly, I wanted him to appear attached as the other ones were, so I left the one little bottom wing of the butterfly that was already on there unglued so that I could lift it up and attach the bottom wing of that butterfly underneath and then finish gluing him down. Now I'm applying the Mod Podge just around the edges of all the butterflies, and once this is all dry, I will go back and seal the fronts of the butterflies as well. And here's how it looks so far. I'm using my chalk paint in the color Black Currant to do some sponging around the bottom and the top edges of my little picture. I'm using a small sea sponge, and you just want to make sure that you have these damp before you start trying to apply your paint with them. I just get a little bit of paint on there, and I actually, tap off the excess before I start putting it on there. I don't want big globs of paint, so it's just better to have not enough than to have too much. I'm just going to work this all the way around all the edges, and I'll be painting the handle as well. And you can see all those little paints lined up there. Yeah, we're going to use all of those. And, there's a lot of steps, a lot of layers, but none of this is difficult. And to me, it just gives it such an old, authentic look. It's really worth the extra effort. The next color I'm using is called Merlot, and I'm going to do the same thing with my little sponge. Go in. I'm not going to completely cover up the original color. I'm just going to add this to it, going up a little bit higher than I did with the previous color. And that's what I'll be doing with each color, is overlapping but taking it up just a little bit higher onto the picture. Next color is Rosy Mauve, and I've cut off a little tiny piece from my sponge so that I could fit it into that crevice that's there at the bottom. It's the same process, go overlapping and up a little higher than the previous color. Next color is a chalk paint called Barely Pink, and it is barely pink. It actually was like the perfect color to go between these, excuse me, these pinks, and be able to add kind of a sandy type color to the main part of the vase and up here on the top. So I started blending that in to those previous purple and pink colors, and then I ended up just sponging that in between and around all the butterflies. The next step is adding those same layers of paint around the top and bottom of the handle, only I'm using a brush instead of my sea sponge. First outlining with the darkest color and then blending that up and then adding the other colors on top of that. Now I'm sponging on some of my white paint just to add yet another layer of dimension to this, helping to blend in that barely pink color that I had sponged all over. And this is just where I'm finishing up with those paint colors on the handle ends and top, using a little tiny sponge dauber and my brush. This is my IOD butterfly stamp. I have a couple of these that have the name of the butterfly attached to it on the bottom. And I want to stamp just those words onto this in random areas. So I tape off the bottom part of the butterfly so that I don't get my ink on there. I'm using jet black. And then I can just place the butterfly. I found it was easier to hold it from the top part and then use my other hand to press down on the words. I repeated this with a couple of different stamps. I picked out the ones that would fit and added them in just a couple more areas onto my picture. This is one of the smaller stamps from that IOD collection, and I'm just figuring out my placement here. I want him on the top, just off to one side, so I ink him up and put him on there. And here's how we're looking so far, just a few more things to do. Now I'm dry brushing my white acrylic paint on, just getting very little paint on that stiff brush, dabbing most of it off, and then lightly going over the entire piece. I'm using Spanish copper rub and buff to just gently go over the bottom section and around the handle and around the rim. Just adds this warm, kind of distressed look to this. It helps to tone down the colors. And then I will build this up around the top and bottom portions of the handle to make them look really kind of rusted and crusty and old. The last step on this will be a clear coat of spray paint to seal everything in. And this is how it ended up turning out. There will be pictures at the end of the video. Now we're onto the cutting board. I'm using that same dark purple called Blackcurrant. I did shellac this before I painted to prevent that black stain or whatever it was on there from coming through, bleeding through on my paint. And once that was all dry, I sealed it with my Select Seal matte sealer. I'm going to use my StazOn ink and jet black to put on this crackle stamp that I have. This is Iron Orchid Designs. They have a whole texture stamp set with different types of textures. And I thought this would be a really nice, subtle effect to have in the background of this cutting board. So now I just repeat this. I re-ink my stamp and go up to the next spot and then ink it one last time to do the smaller part at the top. I wanted to get some of this on the sides as well, so I didn't put it on my thin mount this time. I just inked up that small portion on one side and just with my hand I just pressed it on there the best I could. It was kind of a rounded edge, but it went on surprisingly well for doing it that way. Now I'm going to be using some white ink to use on my Iron Orchid Design stamp called Sprigs. And this one has little pretty flowers hanging off of it. I will be using that in the center, and then I will be doing a different one on either side of it. So I have it on my thin mount, and I center as best I can, and then press it down, trying to make sure every little piece gets on there, but not overly pressing. I don't want it to smudge. This part always makes me nervous. It's like, if it doesn't turn out, I have to start all over. But it turned out. Look at that. So now I'm inking up the other stamp I want to use. I'm going to put this one here, and you could see it except for the great hair shot there. Okay, so you see how the center isn't completely stamped, and so I wanted to go over that, but I only put the ink in the center, so I wiped off around the edges so I wouldn't like completely mess this up. And it did get a little bit better impression on there. It's not perfect, but hey, it's fine. I'm good with it. So now this one, I wanted to put it a little bit lower than the other one. So I'm just taping off the end of that stamp so that I don't get the ink on there. And then I can line it up where I want it and then attach it to my thin mount and then pull that off, ink it up, and then stamp it back down. And that one turned out pretty good. There was a little bit of extra at the stem, so I just took a baby wipe and gently kind of wiped away at it until it didn't look quite so heavy. While we wait for the ink to dry, I'm just taking a cardstock tag and adding a messy coat of white chalk paint front and back. When that's dry, I'm going to cut out a piece of this botanical collage paper from Tim Holtz. I just figure out where I want my design to be on there, and then I can cut around that and attach it with Mod Podge. I just do a rough cutout because I will sand off the excess around the edges after the Mod Podge is dry. So I just get a good coat of Mod Podge on there and lay that down, smooth it out the best I can. It's not perfect. It's not like perfectly centered or anything. I just kind of wanted it that way, just kind of messy. So I just make sure all the edges are attached, and then we can set that aside to dry. I'm making a paper butterfly to put on that tag. So I used a butterfly hole punch to get the shapes out of an old book page, and now I'm just inking up around the edges with my jet black StazOn ink. To attach them together, I just put a little bit of hot glue in the very center of that cutout and then put the other one on top of it. This way the wings will still be separate, so it'll have more dimension to it. So now I'm just going to add a little more hot glue and attach that third butterfly on there. I'm using this 22 gauge copper colored wire that I got from Michael's. It was discounted because it was in the fall section. And I'm just going to wrap this around the middle section of that butterfly 2 times, leaving a generous piece at the end for the antenna. because I don't know how long I want them to be. So I just make sure I have an extra long piece there at the top. Then I wrap that wire around twice, leaving the, so it comes back up to the top, and then that I can snip it off, and now we have two little antennae there. And you just twist those together, and then you can determine how long you want your little antenna to be. And then just snip off the wire to the desired length. And I'm looking at it on my tag so that I can see what I want to do. And I cut it once, and then I think, nah, it's still too long, so I cut it a little bit shorter. But this was just so easy, and it's like the cutest little butterfly. And here's just where I'm sanding off the edges. Even though this was cardstock, you can still take your little sanding block and sand that paper off of there. And now I'm using my Distress Oxide stamp in the color Vintage Photo to go around the edges of this tag. And then I also kind of get it up on top around the edges and kind of smear it around. I even just use my finger just to add some aging to the edges of the tag. I attached the butterfly just with some hot glue on that back center portion. I offset it just a little bit to the side. And look at that. Look at how cute that is. It's so rustic and simple. I absolutely love this. Now back to our board. I'm just taking some jute twine and wrapping it around several times and then tying it off. Then I just make a simple bow out of those strings that I had just knotted together, and I add a little hot glue just to make it more secure. I wrap some twine around the neck as well, several times, and this time tying it off to the side. Now I'm going to attach my little tag I made by putting both ends of that twine through the hole in the top and then looping it back through, pulling it up, and then I can just tie it off and add a little hot glue just to make it more secure. For the finishing touch, I had these cute little, very small white flowers that I added one up at the top of that tag and then one in the center of my bow. And that is it for this one. Now the rolling pin handles are going to get that same dark purple color called black currant. The rest of the rolling pin I did in the white chalk paint. I did two, maybe three coats. I don't remember because things went awry, and none of this will end up mattering, trust me. So after all the paint was dry, I went ahead and sealed it because I wanted to do some transfers, so I wanted it to be sealed first. And then I realized that I didn't want the end of the rolling pin to be white. I wanted it to be the same color as the handle, so I painted that. And here's where things went crazy. So I wanted to do that crackle finish like I did on the board, only I wanted to use these distressed inks from Tim Holtz. And it was just really hard to see that ink on my stamp, so I couldn't tell if I had enough or if I had too much. I was mixing colors, and oh my gosh, the biggest mess. I pulled too hard. It smeared, it smudged, but I had sealed it. So I thought, well, I just cleaned it off with a baby wipe, which I did, and I tried again. And it was going a little better, but still not consistent, not uniform at all. And I thought, well, I wiped it off with a baby wipe once before. I can do that again. But nope, that I tried to repaint it in white and that ink just bled through. So here I am now using black chalk paint, going a different direction. Oh my gosh. So, but this turns out great. So I'm not unhappy about it. So now this is the Iron Orchid Designs Brocante transfer that I want to use on this rolling pin. So far this is going well. So I'm just going to go with it. Um, I cut out different pieces of it. I didn't want it all in just one piece. It wouldn't fit on my rolling pin. So I separated the pieces, figured out how I wanted them on here, and now I'm just applying it with my little transfer stick. And you can see on that black paint, this white flower just looks stunning. So I'm actually really happy that things went the way they went, and I made the change and went with the black. So I just continue applying these transfers and making sure that when I take the carrier sheet off that I burnish them on there really well. And look at that, it looks great. And I have one last one I want to put on here. And that one looks great too. So now we can seal it with some wax. I'm starting with clear wax because I'm going to be applying antiquing wax as well. So I need this as that first layer, kind of a protective barrier so that I have more control over how much I leave on or pull off of the darker antiquing wax. So it's just a process of brushing it on and then wiping it off with a soft cloth. Now before I do the dark wax, I decided to do a little sandpaper distressing on the handles. I probably shouldn't have done that because I did like the exposed natural wood that came back through, but I forgot I shellacked this thing before I ever painted it. So the antiquing wax did not want to stick to the bare wood. So I had to apply several coats and like let it dry a really long time, and then I kind of had, spots that weren't like they were darker than other spots on the handles. So I mean, it's supposed to look rustic, so that's okay. But I just completely forgot that I had shellacked it. So anyway, I'm doing the antiquing wax across the entire rolling pin now. And because that clear wax is on there, it's not going to ruin those white flowers. This just adds a richness to the black. It's kind of hard to explain, and I don't know if the camera really picks it up, but in person you can definitely see it. It just really adds a lot to that black color and easily comes right off of those white flowers. So it's just a total win-win. Once the wax was dry, I did a final buffing of the entire rolling pin, and that was it for this one. All that's left now is to see the finished products. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you find my content useful and will consider subscribing to my channel. But most importantly, I hope I've inspired you to go create something. See you next time.